Hello, I'm Aria from Liberal Reform. We promote personal liberty, free markets and globalism within the Liberal Democrats. You can find out more about us here. We've interviewed each of the contenders to be our London Mayoral Candidate. You'll hear a little bit about their experience, their plans and their policies, and we hope you find these useful in deciding how to cast your vote.
Okay, so I'm Siobhan Benita. I think my experience for this particular selection process is I was a senior civil servant, so I was working in Whitehall for 16 years. During that time I worked in all the major kind of domestic government departments, so I worked in transport, environment, local government, and I spent several years in the Cabinet Office working on reform programmes. So all of those government departments are departments that the Mayor of London has to work very closely with. So it means it gives me really good experience of how government works and how policy decisions are made, which I think will be really invaluable for this campaign. But my other experience, I think probably the most relevant experience that I have, is I ran before as an independent candidate. So I ran in 2012 as the independent candidate in the mayoral election. And I did much better, I think, than people thought I would, with kind of no party machine behind me. And I actually got 330,000 votes. So beating UKIP, coming very close to Brian Paddock and the Liberal Democrats, sorry about that at the time, and the Green candidate as well. So I learned a lot during that period of kind of how you run an effective London-wide campaign.
What made you want to switch from being an independent to joining the Lib Dems?
So as a senior civil servant, I couldn't actually be a member of a political party. So the way I look at this is the moment I decided I wanted to be part of a party, it's the Liberal Democrats that I chose. And I've never considered being part of any other political party. I actually joined the Liberal Democrats on the morning of the EU referendum result. So I think, like a lot of our new members, Brexit was the very final straw for me. But it's not just Brexit itself. It's not the kind of, although I'm very passionately pro-EU, my husband's French, so it's affecting us kind of personally as well. It's just the frustration with the way that Labour and Conservatives are now driven by the extremes within their parties. And I think as a senior civil servant, I saw behind the scenes kind of how dysfunctional that could be when policy making goes wrong. So for all of those reasons, I think it was time for people like myself to kind of collaborate and come together and all work together to have a much more honest, a much more, I wouldn't say moderate, but I would say sensible kind of politics.
Okay. So you've talked about how you did quite well when you did your personal partyless independent run. What from that campaign would you bring into the Lib Dem campaign?
Gosh, I learned so much in that campaign. I think media, actually getting the support of media is the most important thing, I think, if you want to make an impact in a campaign. And I think that's where the Lib Dems struggle sometimes to actually get that media coverage. So I was very fortunate, I think, in that the Evening Standard got interested in my campaign. And we can see that if the Evening Standard aren't interested in you, you're not going to make much impact in the campaign. So actually talking to journalists, getting to know journalists, choosing the right journalists as well. So I got very good coverage from The Guardian and The Independent, as well as the Evening Standard. And you could see kind of from the interest in my website that whenever I got a big article in one of the newspapers, that made a massive difference in terms of people coming to the website. I learned how to do live interviews, what not to say. You know, I kind of very quickly got used to some of the questions that people would ask you when they're trying to trip you up. So I think I got quite good at deflecting some of those and still being able to get across my own messages. So dealing with the media was one thing. The other thing, though, was just learning about the amazing variety of organisations and people who are doing brilliant things across London and who very rarely actually get the light shone on them. So a lot of people were hugely grateful when I went and spent time with their organisations, with their charities, and actually sat down and spent a day with them or time with them and listened to what they had to say, and especially young people across London. And what they were saying is none of the other candidates had ever done that. They'd never actually come. Some of them had done photo opportunities. They'd gone, they'd got a photograph. They hadn't actually spent time with those organisations to get a sense of what their challenges were or the good things that were being done. So that was another big kind of lesson for me is that actually public leaders need to spend more time understanding what a lot of these organisations are doing, and it's only then really that you can develop the right policies, I think, to help a lot of those people. I would actually say there's two at the moment. So if you'd have asked me that a couple of months ago, I would have said housing. And I still think housing is a massive challenge, and we have far too many people for whom housing is unaffordable. We have too many people still sleeping rough on the streets. We have too many people in bad quality accommodation. So they've got a place, but it's bad quality. So I'll come back to housing in a minute. So I would have said that was the biggest challenge. But actually, I think at the moment, the thing that is worrying people the most in London is crime. And I would say that we've had a period of kind of almost weekly headlines and statistics about how bad serious crime is becoming in London. And I think the perception that London is a dangerous place is very sad, because actually the pockets of serious violence are just that. They are still pockets, but there is this very damaging perception around how that violence is affecting more and more people in London. And I just completed a piece of work on serious youth violence. I'm part of a cross-party parliamentary commission on serious youth violence. And I think even though Sadiq, the current mayor, is saying a lot of the right things, from the work that we did and the evidence we gathered on this commission, I can still see that we're not implementing the right approach to actually tackle this problem. So we're still focusing too much on the kind of enforcement bit at the end, and we're still saying it's all about more stop and search and it's about more police. Yes, we need more police. We don't necessarily need more stop and search. We need more police on the streets, in the right places. We need more community policing. But actually, we're not doing enough to tackle the root causes of this. And the root causes are all about trauma. They're all about childhood trauma. They're about poverty. They're about lack of hope. They're about lack of opportunity. And we really need to shift the focus onto that, because if we just keep firefighting over here, we're still getting these poor young kids who are growing up with massive trauma issues, massive mental health issues, and they become extremely vulnerable to serious crime, either as perpetrators or as victims of serious crime. So there's a lot more that we can do in that area, and that certainly would be a big part of any kind of manifesto that I put forward, is how we would tackle that in a very different way.
So what would you do to tackle that?
So I think, the term that people are using for this is the public health approach to serious violence, but I think that term itself is being used too loosely, and lots of people are kind of saying they're doing it. So whether it's Sadiq announcing his violence reduction unit, which is based on the model in Glasgow of how they do things, or whether it's council saying they're doing a more public health approach, what they're saying is basically we're joining a few things up, and therefore we've got the public health approach. Actually, if you look at Scotland and you look at other countries abroad where they've properly done a public health approach, it requires fundamental change at all levels. So it requires the police, youth services, charities, communities, individuals, schools, all of those people to develop a strategy together about how they're going to work together to solve this. It requires people focusing on those issues, I said, early interventions. That means funding is done differently. It means you share your funding a lot more, and it means you shift your funding to much earlier in a person's life so that you try and tackle these things much more early on in their life. And it requires a kind of shared understanding that this is not going to be a quick fix. You can't just announce something and think that it's going to change. So in Scotland, they said it was going to be a 10-year strategy, and it wasn't until 10 years that they actually said, we think we're making really good progress. And I think that's the way that we need to approach it in London. So I'm pleased that people are talking about the public health model, but I'm very wary as well that they're using it in just too superficial a way, and they're not actually attacking the real issues underneath.
And now on to the other main issue, housing. What would you do about it? What do you think the problems are?
So housing, as I was saying, it's still a shame that, when I ran in 2012, this was an issue. It's still an issue. People are still saying all the same things, and I'm sure all of us as candidates will be saying the same things. We need to build more affordable homes. That's absolutely true. The mayor can't do that on her own. She has to work with boroughs and councils to get that done. But there are some things that I think previous mayors haven't done well enough. So I think it's a bit of a myth that there isn't still brownfield sites available across London. There are brownfield sites available across London. A quick Google of the kind of Assembly website where councils have actually posted where they believe brownfield sites are shows that there's quite a lot of land available. The problem is a lot of it's quite polluted land, it's quite toxic land. So actually we have to do more to help those councils to clean up that land so that can then be used to build homes. It frustrates me massively, not least because I walk past many of these on my way to the station every day, that we still have properties lying empty across London. And the latest figures show that there's at least 20,000 of what are called long-term vacant properties in London. So they're the ones that have been lying empty for kind of 2 years or more. And again, there's a lot more that we can do. Various mayors have said things about this, but I think the mayor needs to roll their sleeves up a lot more and actually understand again what the underlying issues are. And I did a piece of research on this with Warwick University about why these properties lie empty for so long. Because it doesn't actually make sense. If somebody owns this property, economically, it doesn't make sense that it's lying empty. And actually, a lot of them are to do with somebody inherits this property because somebody passes away. They don't actually know what to do with this property, or they have a misconception that if they just don't do anything with it, it's going to gain in value over time. What they're not factoring in is that it falls into disrepair, so actually it's going to be very costly to bring it back. So actually, I think some very simple steps in terms of how does the mayor work with councils, the councils work with people who find themselves kind of owning these properties. How do you actually help them to bring that back into use? Grant schemes are available, but a lot of people don't know about them. And it is true that councils have had a lot of their services cut. So councils used to have empty homes officers, and some of them have cut those services now. So I think that's an area that I would like to focus on as well. But it's not just homes, not just domestic properties either. So the Centre for London just published a really interesting report about unused spaces, so even commercial spaces across London. And I think there's a lot more that we could do in terms of kind of pop-up spaces for businesses in those commercial properties. But also there's kind of there is a slight movement now to how can we use those spaces as temporary accommodation for people as well, so allowing some people like guardianships and that. And actually I was thinking today, when I was thinking about other things like Uber and technology platforms and everything, about why we couldn't be doing more to match people with empty spaces using kind of a technology approach to this as well. So I think there's a lot more that we could do if we're a bit more creative about homes. So I'm not saying it's not still about building, that's the big picture, but everybody's going to say that and we need to do more of that. But I think it's very frustrating that there are some of these win-wins as well that are still there and they're not being addressed.
Yes, you talk about the win-wins, and there are a handful of brownfield sites. Are there any other places that you think there's low-hanging fruit for development?
So again, in the report that I did, there's a lot of flats above shops, for example. There are spaces like that people don't really know about. They're not really ever audited. So there's a lot of opportunities there. As I said, I think there's a lot of old commercial space that can be used as well. And I think there's probably still more analysis to be done around where you could start to create more residential hubs, maybe across London, and having a look. That will depend on kind of where all the infrastructure can go as well. And you don't want to be putting people in places where that's going to cause kind of congestion problem and everything. And there are, the mayor owns quite a lot of this land through TfL and things like that. So I think there are a lot of TfL properties that could be used as well in a more creative way. We're starting to do that. London's starting to do that. But I think there are lots of opportunities like that. I mean, homelessness again. I look at homelessness in a very similar way to I look at serious youth violence. So I think we're not tackling the underlying issues why people find themselves homeless in the first place, because even if we do more to provide shelters and we do more to provide day centres and we do more to find people accommodation, that's not going to solve the issue about why they were homeless in the first place. And actually, I used to do a soup run with my parents, so we used to talk to, or try and talk to, a lot of people who were homeless who used to sleep on Victoria Street. And a lot of those people were never, ever going to accept a place in a hostel or in a day centre. And again, it came down to the fact that they had experienced huge trauma of some type in their life and were struggling from unaddressed mental health issues. And just the idea of them to go somewhere where somebody was going to be trying to tell them what to do or was going to be trying to get them back into a system was just something that they couldn't face. So actually, I think we need to look at addressing the moments when these people become vulnerable and when they might be finding themselves either going in one direction or another that might lead them on to kind of being homeless. And the evidence is clear that some of this is around when people leave institutions, when they come out of the army, for example, when they come out of care homes, when they come out of hospital if they've been ill. So it's at that moment, I think, that we need to be doing a lot more to provide these people with support and tell them what options are available to them so that they don't find themselves going onto the streets in the first place. I love Uber. I use Uber all the time, so I'd be really hypocritical if I said anything else. I think there's a place for Uber, and I think there's a place for black cabs in London. I think black cabs are the iconic thing. Tourists are always going to want to use them. But actually, I fell out of love with black cabs. One, I never really started using them because they're so expensive. But secondly, I never carried cash with me. So, like, for years, even if I wanted to get in a black cab, I would never have gotten a black cab. And I know they have credit cards now and everything, but Uber's just so customer friendly, and it really is convenient. I do believe that we need to look at the way it is regulated to make sure it's safe for people, to make sure... what I like about Uber, actually, I have actually set up an Uber account for my two daughters. They're 18 and 19, and they can get an Uber off my account because I think it's quite accountable. I think it's quite safe because actually I know who they're with and where they've gone and everything, and I quite like that. So, and I actually like the fact that you can share cars with Uber, and I think more and more people are going to do that because I think that's actually quite an environmentally friendly policy as well, that actually if you can start getting more people in one vehicle, then surely we should be supporting that. So I think Sadiq was wrong to do what he did in principle, but I think sending the signal that you can't just operate kind of with absolutely no regulation was not a bad thing. But I would be very sad if we got to a situation where London didn't have an Uber service. Yeah, I mean, to give Sadiq due, and I think we should, where he deserves it. I think he's said the right things about Brexit. He's been very outspoken about his stance against Brexit, and he's been very supportive of the People's March. So I welcome all of that, and I think it's really good that he did that, and I wish more people in the Labour Party would do the same. So that's good. I think it's a shame there were some other things that he was doing earlier on in his mayoralty, which I would like to see brought back on the table. So I think London is so important for the economy, and it's so unique in the UK in terms of its reliance on EU workers, that actually we should be thinking much harder about how we protect that. And there was some work done by, I think it was PwC, and I think Sadiq was supporting it, looking at things like a regional visa system, for example, for London, where actually if we end up Brexiting, you could still have a different system operating in London that would maintain some of that flexibility that we currently have. So I would really like to see things like that come back on the table. I mean, on the morning of the referendum result, I was actually right, that's it, London should put itself forward as like a separate state or Monaco or something, let's just go our own way. But I think there is something in between that we can do because London is so different, and I was looking at the statistics, I think it's about 90% of businesses in London employ at least one person from the EU. So this is not going to be insignificant for London. And I know London's amazing and I know it's resilient, but actually all of those businesses, they don't just rely on the labour, they rely on the fact that standards and regulation and everything is the same. They rely on that for their business. They rely on that to get things done quickly across countries and everything. Yeah, okay, so we do have terrible air quality in London, and that's really damaging for people's health. Lots of studies have come out now about just how damaging that is as well, which is very worrying. So we need to keep moving in the direction that previous mayors, to be fair to them, have moved, and which we certainly as a party have been pushing for a long time, So Caroline Pidgeon has been pushing for this for several years, and that is ensuring that public transport is a viable, accessible alternative to private car use. So I would like, for example, to be looking at different ways we could play around with congestion charging. So can we get smarter with that? Can we charge different rates at different times of the day, for example, to discourage people, for example, from using their cars to do the school run? So it would be quite good for people to walk a bit as well. That would be good as a public health approach maybe as well. Where there isn't a congestion zone, then you could do it maybe with parking fees. So it would have a similar effect, that you could actually have increased parking charges at different times of the day to discourage people as well. We could look at having an additional congestion zone around Heathrow, and I know that's been a Lib Dem policy before, and I think that's quite an interesting idea to pursue. But actually, if we're going to have a serious alternative, then that transport system has to work, and it has to work really well. And I have just experienced 2 of the worst days ever in terms of train travel coming in from Kingston, where I live, on South West Rail, and this is becoming a daily misery for so many people. And I think the Mayor has to start shouting again about the fact that so many of these train lines that come in to London are just not fit for purpose anymore. And I think TfL should definitely be pushing harder to start running those services, and the failing train companies at the moment should be sacked, because it just isn't delivering a service that's fit for purpose. So I think we have to do all of those things. We have to protect local bus routes, for example. And I was looking at all of the local Lib Dem party websites, which is quite an interesting thing in itself to do as an exercise. And there are so many of them that are campaigning against local bus routes. And I think if we genuinely want to be saying to people, we want to get you out of your cars and into public transport, we have to protect those kind of things. We can't be saying one thing on the one hand and then taking away the alternative on the other hand. And things like bus routes are really important, especially for kind of elderly people. That can be their cheapest way of getting around. So we need to start doing a lot more, looking at making sure that transport system really works. But I also think there are more things we can do with housing. We can be looking at planning permission that the Mayor does have control over, making sure that all of the houses that we build are to even higher environmental standards as well. We can have solar panels, you can have heat pumps, sourcing the heat from the air. You can have sinking tanks so that you reuse the rainwater, and all of those kind of creative things that I think a lot of countries just do now as a matter of course, and I think we're perhaps a little bit behind on that. But the environment also, there's one other thing which is kind of a bit of a bugbear for me, which is I think for a lot of people, maybe older residents maybe, but I think for a lot of people this certainly bugs me. It's just how dirty some of our streets are. So when you're talking about the environment, it's not just the air quality as well. It's just how dirty and how much litter there is. And actually, if I get selected, one of the things that I'll be proposing in my manifesto, because I remember this from when I was a kid, and it was one of the things I really enjoyed doing at school, is let's have a kind of Keep London Tidy campaign that's led and championed by the Mayor. And it's just about that simple courtesy of picking up your litter. So there's those kind of things. And one thing I did when I was in the civil service is I eliminated, or I banned, basically, I was working with the Cabinet Secretary, so I had the power to do this, the use of plastic bottles from meetings, for water in meetings. And I think there's a lot more that we could do to drastically reduce the use of single-use plastic in London. And I think that's an aspiration, that we should get rid of all unnecessary plastic in London as fast as we can.